If you used a Lumix camera in the 2000s, you probably remember that feeling. Small digital cameras were suddenly becoming serious. Zoom ranges felt impossible. Leica-branded lenses made compact cameras feel premium. And for many photographers, Lumix was the bridge between the film era and the digital future. Today, we are looking at 5 Lumix lenses from that era that photographers still remember. And if that sounds like your kind of story, subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses, because this is exactly what we do here. At number 5, we have the Leica DC Vario-Elmarit 28 to 280 mm on the Lumix DMC-TZ3. There was a specific kind of photographer the TZ3 was made for. Not the person planning a full DSLR kit for a weekend shoot. Not someone with a bag full of glass and a tripod. It was made for the person who wanted one camera, one pocket, and the confidence to photograph an entire trip without missing a moment. In the mid-2000s, that idea felt genuinely exciting. And the lens sitting at the heart of the TZ3 is a big part of why. The 28mm wide end was practical in the best possible way. City streets, group shots at dinner, wide landscapes on a coastal morning, it handled the kind of scenes that fill a travel memory card. Then you push the zoom and suddenly you were at 280 millimeters, pulling in a distant church tower or a bird perched across the harbor. All of that in a camera that fit in a shirt pocket. That combination did not exist in many places in 2007, and Lumix knew exactly what they had. The optical image stabilization built into the system meant that even at the long end, you had a fighting chance of walking away with a sharp frame. For a pocket camera that felt almost unfair in the best possible way. Was it perfect? No. The sensor was small, and in low light, the images told you so. It was not the lens for a photographer chasing technical perfection, but that was never the point. This was the lens for people who wanted one small Lumix camera to handle the whole trip. And in that role, it delivered something that mattered more than pixel counts. It delivered freedom. Today, it sits as a time capsule of the pre-smartphone travel camera era, a reminder of when packing light meant carrying one small Lumix and nothing else. Some photographers still seek out the TZ3 purely for that feeling, and honestly, that says everything. The color rendering from that CCD sensor paired with the Leica-branded glass gave travel images a warmth and character that modern smartphone processing has never quite managed to replicate. At number 4, we have the Leica DC Vario-Elmarit 36 to 432 mm f2.8 on the Lumix DMC-FZ20. In the early 2000s, bridge cameras occupied a very specific place in the photography world. They were not compact cameras pretending to be serious. They were not DSLRs demanding a financial commitment most hobbyists could not make. They were something in between. And for many photographers, they were exactly enough. The FZ20 was one of the best arguments that era produced, and the lens attached to it was the reason why. A constant f2.8 aperture across a zoom range that stretches from 36 all the way to 432 millimeters. Let that settle for a moment. That kind of reach, with that kind of aperture consistency, in one fixed camera body, in 2004, that felt like something the industry had no right to offer at that price. Wildlife photographers used it, sports photographers used it, travel photographers used it. People who had spent years wishing they could afford serious telephoto glass suddenly had access to focal lengths that used to feel out of reach. The Mega OIS stabilization system worked alongside that constant aperture to give photographers a genuinely usable handheld experience at focal lengths, where camera shake had previously ended the conversation entirely. The honest version of this story includes the limits. It was a fixed lens. You could not swap it out. The sensor was smaller than a DSLR, and by modern standards, the image quality at the long end shows its age. But none of that changes what this lens meant to the people who used it. For many Lumix users, this was the lens that made one camera feel like an entire camera bag. That is not a small thing to carry into an era when photography was still finding its digital footing. There is a reason bridge camera enthusiasts still bring up the FZ20 by name, not because it competes with anything made today, but because it gave an entire generation of hobbyists a kind of reach and confidence they had never held in their hands before. It democratized telephoto photography in a way that felt almost radical at the time, and the photographers who experienced that still remember it clearly. At number 3, we have the Leica DC Vario-Summicron 24 to 60mm f2.0 to 2.8 on the Lumix DMC-LX3. By 2008, something was shifting in the compact camera world. The race for bigger zoom numbers had been going on for years, and most photographers with serious intentions had started to feel the fatigue of it. More reach, smaller sensor, noisier files. The pattern was familiar. Then the LX3 arrived, and it asked a different question entirely. What if a compact camera stopped chasing zoom and started chasing quality? The Vario-Summicron lens on the LX3 was built around a different set of priorities. 24mm at the wide end meant real travel coverage, honest street photography framing, and the kind of environmental portraits that compact cameras rarely handled well. The ff2.0 aperture at that wide end meant low light was no longer a conversation ender. Indoor scenes, evening streets, cafe interiors, the LX3 moved through those situations with a confidence that compact cameras of that era rarely earned. The CCD sensor underneath produced colors that photographers still talk about. Warm, textured, filmic in a way that felt almost accidental and entirely welcome. Panasonic also gave users real manual controls, an aperture ring, exposure compensation, full manual mode, which sent a clear message that this camera was designed for people who actually knew how to shoot. It was not a perfect camera. 60mm at the long end meant you were not reaching for distant subjects. High ISO performance reminded you that a small sensor has limits. But the LX3 lens did not try to do everything. It tried to do the important things well. Wide travel shots, street photography, low light, and everyday documentary images. And in doing that honestly, it earned a reputation that has outlasted almost everything else from that era of compact cameras. Today, as the CCD compact revival grows and photographers actively hunt down early digital cameras for their character and color rendering, the LX3 sits near the top of almost every conversation. That is not coincidence. That is a lens that understood what mattered before most compact cameras did. It treated its user like a photographer rather than a consumer, and that distinction meant everything to the people who carried it. If this kind of lens history is what you are here for, the camera's photographers actually remember the glass that shaped real shooting experiences. Subscribe to AltBuzz Lenses. This channel exists for exactly this. Not the newest gear on every shelf. The lenses and cameras that meant something. At number 2, we have the Lumix G Vario, 14 to 45mm f3.5 to 5.6 ASPH with Mega OIS. In 2008, Panasonic and Olympus announced something that most of the industry received with cautious curiosity and a reasonable amount of skepticism. A new camera system smaller than a DSLR with interchangeable lenses built around a sensor standard that did not yet have a track record. Micro Four Thirds was a bet on the future, and the Lumix G1 was the first camera to place that bet publicly. The lens that shipped with it was this one. For many photographers at the time, the decision to try the system at all came down to how that first kit lens felt in the hand, and whether it made the whole proposition feel believable. It would be easy to dismiss the 14 to 45mm as a kit lens in the most ordinary sense of the phrase. Modest aperture, nothing exotic about the focal range, no headline specification to anchor a marketing campaign. But that framing misses what this lens actually was. For the photographers who picked up a Lumix G1 in 2008 or 2009, this was the lens that introduced them to the idea that interchangeable lenses did not require a large, heavy camera body, that mirrorless could feel light and considered and genuinely usable. The optical image stabilization helped. the compact size helped more. The whole package said something that mattered. Serious photography does not have to be heavy. It covered focal lengths from a useful wide through to a short telephoto, handling family photographs, travel scenes, street work, and casual portraits without asking too much of the photographer carrying it. Technically, it was competent rather than exceptional. The aperture range was not fast, and in lower light you felt that quickly. But the legacy of this lens is not technical, it is historical. This was the lens that introduced many photographers to Lumix mirrorless for the first time. It was the first chapter of a story that the Micro Four Thirds system is still writing. And for that reason alone, it belongs on this list. Looking back now, it is almost quietly remarkable. A modest kit lens that carried the weight of an entire system's first impression and somehow held up under it. Every major mirrorless system in the world today owes something, directly or indirectly, to the early credibility that lenses like this one helped establish. At number 1, we have the Lumix G 20mm f1.7 ASPH Pancake. Some lenses earn their reputation over time, slowly, through the accumulated experiences of thousands of photographers who kept reaching for them. The Lumix G 20mm f1.7 is that kind of lens. It did not arrive with the loudest launch. It did not carry the most extraordinary specification on paper. But the photographers who put it on a Lumix GF1 or a GF2 and walked out into the world with it understood almost immediately that something was different about this one. There was a clarity of purpose to it, a sense that every design decision had been made in service of the photographer using it rather than the specification sheet selling it. The 40mm equivalent field of view sits in a place that feels almost instinctive, wide enough to include context, tight enough to feel intentional. The f1.7 aperture meant real low light capability, evening streets, indoor scenes, available light portraits, without the size penalty that fast glass usually demanded. The Pancake form factor kept the whole package genuinely pocketable in a way that early Micro Four Thirds cameras promised, but sometimes struggled to deliver. When you put this lens on a small Lumix body, the camera disappeared from your attention and the photography took over. That is a rare quality, and photographers noticed it. The rendering at wider apertures had a quality that felt considered rather than clinical. Backgrounds fell away softly, subjects had presence, and the overall look carried a character that purely modern lenses sometimes trade away in pursuit of technical perfection. The autofocus was not the fastest. By today's standards, it would frustrate anyone used to modern tracking and subject detection. And the lens showed its age in certain conditions, as early Micro Four Thirds glass sometimes did. But none of that is the point. The point is what this lens represented at the moment it arrived, and what it still represents today. This was the lens that made Micro Four Thirds feel real, small enough to carry anywhere, bright enough for real photography, and good enough to make people take Lumix seriously. Many early adopters still own it, some still use it, and a new generation of Micro Four Thirds shooters keeps discovering it for the first time, putting it on a modern body and feeling exactly what those early GF1 users felt. That this small, unassuming Pancake somehow just works. It remains one of the most recommended entry points into the Micro Four Thirds system. Not because it is the newest or the sharpest, but because it still delivers the one thing that matters most: photographs worth keeping. Lumix lenses from the 2000s were not perfect, but they gave photographers something that mattered more than perfection. They gave them confidence to travel with one small camera, to zoom farther than seemed reasonable, to shoot in low light with a compact, to try a mirrorless system before the rest of the industry believed in it. The 2000s were the years when digital photography was still proving itself. And for many photographers, Lumix lenses were part of that proof, small, practical, sometimes surprisingly serious, and still remembered today. If classic lens stories and early digital history are what keep you coming back, subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses. We will keep telling the stories worth remembering.